Nigel Farage's Reform UK represents a profound threat, not just to the Labour or the Conservatives, but to Westminster itself, to the establishment itself. And you think, oh my goodness, he's making yet another video about Nigel Farage. Well, yes, because I've just been having tea with somebody who looks at my videos, and we spent the entire time talking about, well, not the entire time. We spent some of the time talking about Farage. The rest of the time we spent talking about our childhood. But we spent an unreasonable amount of time talking about Farage. And the party's disruptive energy lies in its ability to exploit widespread disillusion with conventional politics to become the sort of flag for voter frustration in a movement that redefines democracy as a populist contest driven by social media virality. This is Westminster rethought in terms of TikTok and Twitter. Farage's contact with these platforms epitomizes, like Trump, what one might call government by hindsight and by hashtag, rather than foresight and pragmatism. And so the issue about whether or not somebody is popular, does somebody get a clap? The clapometer of politics. Who would have thought that Huey Green would have become relevant again today? But opportunity knocks. And for you, Mr. Farage, opportunity knocks. Xena, eat your heart out. It's all time for Farage to have the stage and get his moment. And we'll get the clapometer out, because the clapometer is now more relevant, it seems, than an election when people don't turn up. The idea that reform threatens Labour more than the Conservatives is supported by electoral data. Local council by-elections, opinion polls consistently show that reform's rise eats into Labour's base, particularly in economically disadvantaged red wall areas where reform's message of discontent can be expressed. It's not that reform is offering anything. It's that reform is simply there as a siphon for that discontent. These constituencies where Labour's vote has been taken for granted for decades are fertile ground for Farage's populist, economically protectionist messaging. And this populism, the populari in ancient Rome, these were people who imitated the speaking rhythms, the accent of the plebs from the Subura, and those individuals who perfected the accent, who perfected the patter to appeal to this mass, to this base, who indeed in the end had gangs running around the streets, attacking magistrates, attacking members of the political class if they didn't like them. This is reform, isn't it? And this is also the Labour Party and also the Conservative Party. Somehow we've got to a position in politics where politics is defined by an appeal to the popular, rather than looking at what is appropriate about some sort of messaging. It's about a day-to-day appeal to popularity. And reform's direct assault on the Conservative Party, I think, is existential. I think it will end up destroying that's not true. I don't think reform will destroy the Conservative Party. I think the Conservative Party will destroy itself. And its base is energized by this rhetoric of betrayal. That's the base of reform, and that's seeped into the Conservative Party, which is looking for identity. And the only identity that Kemi Badenoch, I confuse Suella Braverman and Kemi Badenoch with each other, and every so often in my mind I even get Liz Truss muddled up. And this is because they all seem to merge into the same trinity of lazy individuals who haven't done their homework and who are extraordinarily shouty. And I suppose I should put Priti Patel there as well. And I find it I find it a disturbing image. All of these people take Thatcher as their icon. They model themselves on Thatcher, but they couldn't be further in the wrong. Thatcher was someone who embraced debate. Thatcher was someone who changed her mind. Thatcher was someone who listened. Thatcher was someone who modified her opinions, perhaps sometimes not quick enough. And when she thought she was right, she rode roughshod over everybody else. And it's that bit which people seem to remember. They don't remember the bit before that. The bit where she was engaged in conversation and engaged in collecting facts and going through the documentation with great attention. Anybody who received letters from Thatcher would know that you get the printed, you get the typed out manuscript, and then within that you get her scribbles, where she's underlined words or added extra words in her own hand before signing it. Thatcher was extraordinarily thorough, and these people, and I would stretch it further to Theresa May and Andrea Leadsom, and to a certain extent David Cameron. These people who see themselves as the leaders of the Conservative Party, who see themselves as inspired by Thatcher, have picked up a BBC caricature of the lady and not the real thing. And it's a great shame that they haven't bothered to read the biographies or the memoirs or to look indeed at the information and the footage that exists, because it's very evident, it's very clear. And Reform, of course, portrays the Conservatives as sellouts on Brexit, on net zero policies, on fiscal responsibility. What the Conservatives are is sellouts on the ideal of serious politics, because they aren't listening, because they aren't doing the work. And Farage's ability to attract defectors like Lee Anderson and Robert Lowe compound the challenge for the Tory leader Kemi Badenoch, who risks losing her grip on her party's right flank as she's lost her grip on the party's left flank. There isn't any party left. Once she loses that right flank, which she will, there's nothing left for her to be head of. She has no party. As one senior Conservative MP put it, reform is a wake-up call to the Conservative establishment. I think that Conservative MP is late in the game. That wake-up call went a few hours ago, and the Conservative Party has gone back to sleep. Farage's appeal transcends ideological lines by leveraging his charismatic persona and his anti-establishment credentials. His partnership with figures like Zia Yousaf, this cosmopolitan former tech entrepreneur, signals a strategic shift, because Yousaf's efforts to professionalize the party and expand its grassroots infrastructure are designed to project reform as a credible alternative to the Westminster elite, not merely a protest movement. And the infusion of Silicon Valley-style innovation into campaign operations, such as voter intention software and branch network building, sets a precedent for a new kind of digital era populism. But it is a populism based on looking at the next election, not a populism based on trying to produce a working solution for everyday life. There's this gap. Farage isn't thinking about tomorrow. Farage is thinking about the next general election. Farage's ties to global figures like Elon Musk and Donald Trump reinforce this populist zeitgeist. Reform is not merely a domestic insurgency, but part of a global wave of right-wing, blinkered populism, reshaping Western democracies from Marine Le Pen in France to the AfD in Germany to Trump in America. Farage's vision of a mega Brexit trade deal with Trump's America and his alignment with Musk's libertarian ethos position him both as a national and an international provocateur. And Farage's dominance on social media reflects a shift in political engagement, where digital platforms replace traditional campaigning as the primary battleground. With 5.4 million followers across platforms, Farage dwarfs rivals like Keir Starmer or Kemi Badenoch. Reform's ability to attract young voters on those platforms, particularly disaffected 18 to 24-year-old men, and it's the 18 to 24-year-old men who determined Trump's success, underscores the success in leveraging the attention economy. And this phenomenon reflects broader concerns about democracy being reduced to a popularity contest, where insignificant polls mean more than a real election. And as Farage himself personifies, this is politics driven by the algorithms of outrage and entertainment, rather than deliberation and policy substance and real people. It's the TikTokification of government, a point that resonates when considering the parallels with Trump's rise and his reliance on media spectacle, on using the media to leverage attention. And why would he not? This is a man who has been schooled, who has been celebrated on reality TV. And believe me, when I talk about reality TV, again, I'm not just pulling an image off the shelf. I understand reality TV. I have been in it. I understand it, and I've looked at it in detail. And Trump is a product of reality TV. Just as the flake is a product of Cadbury's. Trump is not in charge of what he's doing. He is the product of social media. As incidentally is Farage. Farage never had it so good. Farage has been energized and infected with a new life because of social media. It's social media which has given these people resonance and relevance. And what social media gives today can take away tomorrow, by the way. Farage's challenge to Westminster lies in his ability to present himself as a disruptive outsider while building an insider's infrastructure. Reform's rhetoric casting the Tories as failed and Labour as out of touch is an attempt to delegitimise the existing political order. Now, the question is whether he's setting anything up instead, and my argument would be that he's not. And that is the problem. Farage is taking a wrecking ball to the entire Westminster system. And does it deserve some sort of wrecking? Does it deserve such excoriation? Yes. Yes. Farage and I are on the same page on that. Yes, the Westminster system is appalling, particularly at the moment. In the Daily Express, Farage's strategy might involve a reverse takeover of the Conservative Party, like how the DUP supplanted the UUP in Northern Ireland. Alternatively, Reform could emerge as Britain's first successful third-party insurgency since Labour displaced the Liberals a century ago. But does Reform have anything to offer? You see, when Labour took over from the Liberals, Labour had an agendum to represent the working people. What does Farage represent? What does reform represent? In fact, I've answered that question. What does reform represent? Reform represents Farage. What does Farage represent? Farage represents reform. It's a circular thing. And what does reform have to offer? Criticism. Once you take the things that Farage and reform criticise, once you take them away, if you remove the Labour Party, you remove the Conservative Party, Farage is voiceless. Farage has nothing to say. Farage is defined by what he doesn't like. So what does Farage want? Farage's gamble is risky. Sky News says, splitting the right-wing vote could paradoxically help Labour by fracturing the opposition. Reform's ambitions also rely on maintaining its momentum, a task complicated by the volatility of populist movements. You only have to look at the word momentum and look at Jeremy Corbyn's efforts, which often burn out under the weight of internal contradictions or electoral underperformance, or indeed the fact that these populist movements are predicated on frustration. Once you remove the thing that they're frustrated with, or once they're faced with the possibility of actually having some sort of power, they become limp and ineffective. Ultimately, Farage represents a crisis of democracy, a crisis of legitimacy. Reform UK is not merely a political party, but it's a referendum on the failures of traditional government. Zia Youssef argues that Westminster's fixation on ideology over practicality has alienated voters, creating a vacuum that Farage exploits. Yes. And Reform's rise is a stark reminder that democracy, in the age of TikTok and Twitter, risks becoming less about representation and more about reaction, driven by the metrics of likes, shares, and fleeting outrage. Farage's ascent, much like Trump's, forces a reckoning with the changing nature of political power, and it's no good just simply standing there and saying, oh, this is not an important poll, this is just TikTok, this is just Twitter. Westminster needs to acknowledge this movement and needs to deal with it, and needs to deal with it in a grown-up way. At the moment, it's not doing so. It's either running scared or it's challenging it in a futile and puerile manner. It's either Starmer or Badenoch. Those are the two options, and they're both useless. This is a situation where politics risks becoming less about representation and more about reaction. Farage's ascent, much like Trump's, forces a reckoning with the changing nature of political power, and whether this shift heralds a renewal of democracy or its reduction to some sort of fantasy optics remains an open question. As Farage himself warns, 2029 might be his last chance to smash the Westminster glass ceiling. If he succeeds, and I doubt he will, it will not only reshape British politics, but redefine how we conceive of government in the 21st century. So if he doesn't succeed, and this is perhaps more worrying, he will leave behind him a chaos which probably cannot be repaired. So either we're going to end up with Farage in power, which I think is unlikely, or we're going to end up with such a frustration, all the toys broken, that we are looking towards decades of vacuity in political life. And I find that deeply worrying. So I'm sorry to keep going on about Farage. That is my reasoning. That is why, because I think Farage is so important. Farage is about to destroy the system which is built on consensus. And when that is threatened so much at every possible turn, not the content, but the actual structure, and is also being threatened by the government in power. I'll make another video about the attack on the peerage, because I think it's something again which is important. But I thoroughly think that the upper chamber, the House of Lords, is in need of reform. But getting rid of the hereditary peers is actually the worst option. I'll come to that in another video and explain why. But for this video, it's very simple. Farage is a force of destruction because he knows nothing else, and he's a force of destruction predicated on popularity. And if you want to know where that goes, it ends up with the destruction of an entire civilization. We've seen it before. It's very evident from the end of the Roman Republic, when the populares took control and they had nothing positive to offer. Their only offering was to destroy whatever was there. And those people who picked up that populares mantle, including Caesar, unleashed a chaos that eventually led to the establishment of the empire, the rule of the Caesars, the rule of Augustus, and then the mad Claudians, and so on. This destruction of the mechanics of power, the mechanics of politics, can only end in chaos and tyranny.